You need to sit down for that, Morne. Right now, I'd like to add to the conversation Mario Meyer, who is a policy analyst at Youth Capital, and I'm hoping you can stay with us, Morne, because I think what Mario is going to talk about is probably something that feeds into what you guys then see at the higher education level. Mario, good evening.
Good evening to Morne as well.
Thank you. Mario, you are from Youth Capital and you're a policy analyst, but the reason we wanted to chat to you today is, of course, you deal with one of the less unknown, if I want to put it like that, parts of the education system, which is really this idea of providing an additional opportunity to candidates that may have not necessarily aced matric at the first point, for example. Talk us through that program.
Thanks, Kaya. Just to provide a little bit of context, so Youth Capital, we're a youth-led campaign with an action plan for change to shift gears on the issue of youth unemployment in South Africa. And one of the action plan's focus areas is education, and we found that one of the major challenges that young people face in their education journey is getting a recognized certificate that they could use to access further education and training or employment opportunities. And as we know in South Africa, there's a large cohort of young people who simply do not finish school and therefore leave the education system without any certificate. So we've commissioned some research that's been done by RESEP at the University of Stellenbosch on second chance opportunities. And we found that in any given year, there's about 250,000 young people who are pursuing a matric certificate through the Second Chance Matric Programme. And that's taken the route of either the National Senior Certificate, which is for young people who've recently gone through grade 12, and also the senior certificate for young people who may not have reached grade 12 and have been out of the schooling system for at least 3 years.
Mario, are you still there?
Absolutely, yes.
Yes. I thought we lost you there. Mario, you know, the matter that you relate to of people that exit the system but probably don't migrate into another system altogether is a critical one. And quite interestingly, in the article that Morne has written in relation to the ISFAP model and the missing middle, he actually refers to about 10.3 million unemployed young people who are not in education or training. And of course, I suspect, Mario, a lot of the candidates that emerge from the basic education system without that pathway into something else, without that pathway into the future, do tend to form the bulk of the 10.3 million. So I do think that the idea that we need to do something for them before we lose them into this wider ocean of 10.3 million is a fundamentally important thing for society at large.
Yes, I fully agree. I think we lose a lot of the potential of young people and their productive potential ultimately to contribute to our well-being as a society at large when we don't provide them with an opportunity to pathway into another opportunity. There are various factors that may have resulted in them falling out of the schooling system in the first place. And similarly to what Morne has been describing about why students at university may not complete their degree, there are factors beyond just having access that contribute to that.
Yeah.
And we lose a lot of young people in the schooling system as well, and it's really quite important that we provide an alternative avenue for them to get the certification that they need, which we know from research plays a big part in segueing into further training and education and into the labor market successfully.
You know, Mario, that idea of, transitioning into the other system, whenever unemployment data and unemployment stats are released, I'm always haunted by just that clearing and explicit distinction between people who were able to complete matric, for example, and those who were not, and those who were able to complete a degree, because the data is very clear that once you are able to transition into higher education and get access into it, your chances of being part of the labor market are much higher than the people who do not get that chance at all. So if you look at the unemployment rate for people who do not have a matric certificate, for example, it's astronomical. If you look at the data of people who did complete matric but weren't able to transition into a better system, into a higher education system, they are highly unemployed. So the idea that we should start cutting down on those inevitable domino effect of people not finishing matric and not getting a certificate is a remarkably important one, not just for the candidates now, but for the long-term social dynamics of the country when you're talking about employment and unemployment rates, for example, because I think what we're seeing now is the effect of maybe a program of yours having come too late for some candidates who are now hearing, wait a minute, 10, 15 years ago, I was in that position, but no one gave me a chance. No one came back to me and said, look, it didn't work out in the matric results this year, but if you do not go back, it will never work out at all. So I think it's a remarkably important consideration. Morne, I mean, you've been listening to Mario. What are your views on what he has put together?
No, I think it's phenomenal, I mean, really, when you talk also about a second chance, you're getting me very excited, because I think we need to move away from this notion that somebody failed once or didn't do well or things didn't go according to plan because of many, many circumstances that could have caused that. And now we kick them out of the system. And I mean, your notion of unemployment, we see graduate unemployment at 8.9% versus the unemployment rate for youths well above 40%. If you take the 15 to 34 group. We really need many of these programs, and I really want to compliment Mario and the team, and I've been checking them out a bit on the web and while we were listening, and it sounds like an awesome initiative.
Mario,
Well done, Mario.
One of the criticisms, Mario, that always emerges, well, it's not from a bad place, but from, a very good space, is the criticism around initiatives of this nature is that they tend to be limited in reach by the question of, well, where is youth capital allocated? Where can youth capital afford to intervene? So they do not become universal intervention measures, and it really just can be limited by resources and by things of that nature. Have you guys found that to be one of the issues that you have to deal with in that you'd love to intervene throughout the system, but resources just don't allow it?
I think I just need to clarify. So what we do at Youth Capital is we try to bridge the dots between data policy and the lived experiences of young people themselves to shine a spotlight on these particular kind of issues. So we don't actually run any second chance programs ourselves as an organization. But what we do is we bring in greater awareness to the issue of in this case, the Second Chance Matric Programme, and the challenges that many young people who are pursuing this pathway face in trying to navigate and succeed through this pathway.
Yeah. Mario, how much of this is actually influenced by what we may call debatable policy measures taken by the state? I know, for one example, the rule that a candidate may not be held back more than once within a phase. So, for example, if I haven't passed at grade 8 at the first attempt, I'm guaranteed to pass the succeeding years because it is essentially illegal for my school or for anyone else to fail me more than once within a particular phase. Now, of course, that does indeed lead to people perhaps getting to the end of the basic education journey less than optimally prepared for the rigors of the matric exams, for example. Are we seeing this as perhaps a manifestation of some of the policies that have been put together, perhaps with good intentions, but unfortunately undesirable outcomes?
It's a fair point. I wouldn't want to comment too strongly on it. I simply don't have the data to. But what I do think is that it's one factor amongst many. There are various push and pull factors, and we have a sister project called the Zero Dropout campaign that focuses specifically on the issue of why young people drop out of school and what could be done, what interventions can be taken to reduce that dropout rate. But for me, the issue is once a young person is out of the system, and especially when they're out of the system without any certification, we have a responsibility to provide them with another opportunity to obtain certification, because it matters quite a bit in the South African context and across the world, so whether or not you have certification. One of the interesting trends we found in the research we've done on the Second Chance Matric Programme is that young people who have a matric certificate and go on to university, even if they don't complete their degree or their diploma and drop out of at university before completion, their employment rates are higher than young people who don't have a matric certificate. And what it might indicate is that just being in a university environment and having that exposure and building one's social networks can make a huge difference to the opportunities a young person is able to access.
Yeah, I think that's a very important, issue that you raised there, because at some point in time, people will say, look, I was able to be in this particular environment. I then identified additional opportunities. And I think you and I probably know that even access to opportunities is so fragmented. A person living in a rural community with very little in the way of economic activity probably doesn't even have an opportunity to say, hey, let me go and do a weekend internship and try and see how this works. But perhaps once they move into places where the universities are located, which tend to be economic hubs, then perhaps those opportunities do open up and they become the deal breaker when a particular entry-level opportunity eventually emerges, which probably does influence the type of data that we're seeing in that regard. I mean, the conversation around education, the state of education and state of higher education is a terminal one. We will always be engaging in this. Morne, I mean, the issues that we are speaking about now relating to people transitioning into the university environment, and some people do not do it at the very first attempt. Some need a second opportunity in order to get them. Do you then see the same trends manifesting within the institutions themselves, where perhaps a candidate very good at the point of inception, but life intervenes? A loss of a parent, for example, is a common example, and then suddenly 1 year doesn't work out. How does ISFAP then deal with the fact that, best intentions notwithstanding, sometimes things just don't work out?
Yeah, we have to deal with that, Kaya, because life happens. And what we do is we do allow for some leeway in terms of that in rule, as you know, with NSFAS, they also have the in rules. For us, we do allow a 1 year extension where it is required because of such circumstances. We've also had a very special compensation this year with COVID, where we said students that have been very adversely affected can raise an appeal to us, and we will then look together with our support team, we look at that appeal and make a decision whether it makes sense to give some leeway to that student.
Now, that's a very important point, Morne, that you raise. Mario, coming back to you, I mean, the issue of trying to then track the young people that are trying to transition within the education system is an important one. What tools do we have that enable us to say, hey, maybe in that particular school, we heard that there was, maybe a very low pass rate, so clearly there's something that needs to be done there. Do we have enough in the way of tracking the individuals that we need to make an intervention in?
Well, I know in the schooling system, there's a lot more being done to improve data collection and tracking. But when it comes to the Second Chance Matric Programme, one of the challenges is a lack of tracking candidates over time. And so we don't really know how they progress through the journey because they aren't well tracked. And the reporting on the Second Chance Matric Programme is not particularly good and to a large extent non-existent. And so it's very difficult to have a clear sense of exactly what the picture looks like in terms of the numbers over time. And as the saying goes, what doesn't get measured can't be managed. And so there are interventions that the system needs. But without that data, it makes it very difficult to know exactly how best to intervene. But there are low-hanging fruits. I listened with quite some interest as you were speaking about systems earlier. And I think for the Second Chance Matric Programme, there are aspects that can be improved that don't require a lot of money being thrown at it. The simple thing of having all the necessary information that people need in terms of eligibility, registration, subject choices, exam venues, and when they do pass certificate collection, having all of that information in one place would make a huge difference. Ensuring that that information is easy to understand and is digestible would also make a huge difference. Because at the moment, it's very difficult to navigate through that information, very difficult to make sense of it. And that's not something that requires a lot of money to fix. That just requires a little bit of creativity and making the effort to understand the lived experiences of those who actually make use of this program.
How do people then step up and say, I've listened to this conversation, I'd like to play my part, I'd like to assist? I mean, how do we make this happen? Mario?
I think this is something that we all as society have a role to play. Certainly government has a big role to play as the custodian of second chance opportunities. But outside of that, I think the civil society space and NGOs have a big role to play in providing support to young people and also tracking the young people themselves who are making their way through second chance opportunities through their interventions. And I think just as individuals, we could all contribute by making our voice heard and saying, for example, to the Department of Education that it's not okay to have a website that makes it very difficult to navigate this information that's very important to many people, saying it's not okay to not make sure that the preparation material that second chances need is not in one place and actually usable in the form of perhaps being data-proof. And the private sector as well could play a role in supporting such initiatives. So I think it's a challenge that all stakeholders in society can contribute to improving and addressing.
Okay. Morne, somebody sitting at home wants to get hold of ISFAP, either because they want to support it, it's a corporate sitting at home saying, hey, I like what I hear, or it's a parent that says, actually, I want my child who's in Matric this year, who's in grade 11 this year, to be part of that system when they get to university. How do they make it happen?